that's why it's important for man to choose, first of all, to find, well, I was going to say to find Jehovah, but I wanted to be more specific about that, because we're actually told in Oahspe, through Oahspe, what the first thing is. The first thing is to become vegan, an herbivorous man and woman of peace. And that's like the first step. And the first step, we're also told in Oahspe, is cleanliness. And so we have to start there. It's like if you have a dirty, clogged engine in your automobile, you can do a little bit of fiddling around with the carburetor or whatever and make it maybe run a little bit longer, but you're certainly not going to improve it. You're not going to help it to actually get better, become a better engine, until the engine itself is clean. And so humanity is sort of is in the same way. To get released from these bondages, I mean, that's a very first step, because that's the first step in getting released from the bondage of the beast. And in particular that animal aspect that everyone has, the animal within them. But the idea is to have the spiritual an ascendancy over the animal part. And if a person consumes animal product, and particularly flesh food, that cannot happen. They can't rise above the animal. They can't rise above the beast. Yes, to some extent, because of the angels and their presence tends to lift man up above that. And they will help at times people to rise above the beast in order for them to learn to do it themselves. Or it may be for some other purpose. It may be for some purpose that's going on in a larger, grand scale of things for the entire earth and for the betterment of all of humanity. But even if that's the case, it's so much easier for everyone involved if the person who's doing this is clean. And we inherit some good stuff. The good stuff, that's with our forebears, we inherit, as well as any shortcomings that they may have had. And so we also receive all that, and we go forward in that. One of the first things we want to do in order to be released from this wheel of life, we could call it the wheel of life in some sense. Well, the wheel of self really is what it is, because we cannot ever escape that. And so from the wheel of life, from life itself, it's always there. But the binding, we can get ourselves released from that. And how do we release ourselves from the bindings? We don't want to get rid of the lessons that are learned by taking an ideal and taking it to its fullness and learning all about it and experiencing that, and then seeing its shortcomings and so forth. We still want to do all that, but what we would like to avoid, if we could, is all the suffering, not being caught up in the collapse of that, in the disparagement and the rending and the distance from Jehovah, because all that is painful. Even those who think, well, all right, well, I deserve this, because I've been really bad all my life, and so I deserve all that's coming to me and all that. And yet, ultimately, even a person like that will rise up in resurrection, and he will also, or she will also, be released from those bindings of self. It is in the release of those bindings of self where the tests that come will tend to be in the area, more and more in the area of one's affinities, one's enjoyment, one's wow, I love doing this kind of thing. It takes a while to get there, and it just depends upon where a person starts. Now, some people are born very close to that. It doesn't take them long and they're there, and other people have a long ways to go. And yet, since we are eternal, it may seem wise, it certainly does to me, that why not start now and labor in the ways that will help everyone, not just yourself, not just myself, but everyone. And so that's all a part of what 13 represents. What we're talking about is essentially two aspects of 13, of the test, of the Uga. And that is the lower and the higher. And now when Samoin was given to man, in the symbols and in the explanations, the angels often had to speak about the lower aspect because man couldn't understand the higher aspect. But he could understand the lower aspect and understand, oh yeah, I understand what that means, all right. I know what test is, and, being bound and caught up in something you can't get out, or you got to. So we've all experienced that, and we all will experience that. That's the lower aspect of 13. The higher aspect of 13. There's also something which is saving grace, you might say, of 13, and that's the word hope, and that's the sense of hope. That's the concept of hope. It's the entity hope. And we say entity because in the old days, early days, man couldn't understand exactly, he couldn't abstract spiritual things very well. He understood corporeal things, especially this was true after the cycle of Osiris, the first and true, who taught man about living a full corporeal life, and everything that they needed to live a full corporeal life was there for man to discover and to labor with. But he did not develop at that time his spiritual, and that was to come later. And so immediately the next Danhe cycle following Osiris was Zarathustra. It was the all pure, the Aisu, who was born, and that was the time when Phragapati, the Orion chief, came, and he helped prepare man for his spiritual aspect. And Zarathustra was the first Aisu for man, what we consider to be the race of man, as compared to the short sacred people, the Ihans, the little sacred people who had been the carriers of the light of the Great Spirit and the knowledge of the spiritual things since the beginning. And they were the leaven for the entire race of humanity. And they always had the Aisus. If there was an Aisu that would come, it would be the Ihans and all that. But Zarathustra was the first Aihuan, the first Gan, the first man, as we know them, to be an Aisu and capable of understanding and knowing all these things, even as we're speaking in here today. With this knowledge, with this spiritual understanding that we have, we can look at this higher aspect of hope and know this entity of hope. In order to understand this entity of hope, man was taught during the time of that cycle of Zarathustra that these spiritual concepts were actual entities.